Well, hello everybody again. This is Manny Aragon of the Rolf Workshop Center for Structural Performance, and welcome to this episode of today's 2014 Endurance Summit. Actually, today's a little bit different format than the rest of the interviews because my colleague and good friend Glen Depke, traditional naturopath of Depke Wellness, is going to be interviewing me today. So without much further ado, I'll just let Glen take over here. But thanks so much, Glen, for doing that, and take it away.
No, it's my pleasure, Manny. And actually, for everybody on the 2014 Endurance Summit, I know you've already been enjoying Manny throughout the interview so far, but there may be some pieces of Manny from a more professional aspect that maybe you're not familiar with. You see, Manny Aragon is a certified advanced practitioner of structural integration, and he's the founder and director of the Rolf Workshop Center for Structural Performance and the producer of the 2014 Endurance Summit. So Manny works with both amateur and elite and professional athletes in the endurance sports field, assisting athletes to gain alignment, efficiency, work through injury-free performance through his expertise in biomechanics, movement analysis, as well as nutrition. And one thing that Manny doesn't know I'm going to share right now, but I think this is so important. I've grown to be not only a colleague of Manny's but also a dear friend. But years ago, when I first met Manny, I actually went through his 10-part series of structural integration. And from somebody who is more of a casual athlete, but somebody who likes to really enjoy athletics and performance across the board, I had a 20 or 30-year-old knee injury that I had built up many compensations to the point where just running, down the block was excruciating knee pain and inflammation for me. And to make my long story short, after going through the 10-part series with Manny, it really changed my life. I was able to run again without that same level of pain and inflammation, and Manny helped me understand how my body built compensations that were restricting me and creating other imbalances, and I learned how to work through those imbalances. So, Manny, I can't thank you enough on that level. So, just thank you.
Well, you're very welcome, and thanks for helping me out today, because this is again, it's a fun thing to do, both of us together, since I know you so well, and have a deep respect and admiration for you as well. So,
all right. Well, let's get going and right today in with some questions. So Manny, you've been involved with the study of movement, structure, healing, and nutrition for some time now. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved in this field?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, but I guess there's a lot of relevant parts to it, so I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. Back in when I was in my early 20s, I was spending a lot of time. First of all, I have a kind of a structural challenge in my own body. I've pretty significant scoliosis, which for those who aren't in the know is like a kind of spiral curvature of the spine, and for many people it leads to it's debilitating and it can actually cripple them. Many people have to have extreme surgeries, putting metal support rods up along their spine and such, and it can limit people's lives physically in many ways. Luckily for me, I was able to that was not the case for me, but I have worked with many people who've had this challenge. So anyway, back in my 20s, I've always been very active, and back in my 20s I was putting a lot of hours in at the martial arts dojo because that was my kind of latest passion. I kind of find things and get way into them for about 10 years or so, and then I think Rolf is kind of an exception there, but I was way into it, and at some point I started experiencing some pain, and that it just wouldn't go away. And being, who I was, it's kind of typical guy, I just thought, you know what, it's going to go away, and this will pass because pain comes and goes, and it didn't. It just kind of like stayed, and I couldn't get comfortable in any position. And anyway, it turns out it was the scoliosis was kind of compacting on me because of all the getting thrown around on the, in martial arts and all that. So at some point, my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, decided, she kind of sat me down. I was like, look, I'm going to call somebody and you need to go. And I said, okay. So I'm easy, but I wouldn't take the first step of calling. She had to do it. So she called around and found somebody, and we went and saw that person. Was a chiropractor, actually, and it was a newer chiropractor. And after maybe, 4 or 5 visits, she said to me, she kind of took me aside and said, I don't think this is really going to be what you need to help you in the long term. So here's a few business cards, and this is nothing against chiropractic. I think it had everything to do with she really wanted to help me, and she just didn't feel like she could, because I've gotten great benefit from chiropractic. For those who've done it, they know what I'm talking about. But anyway, so this woman gave me a bunch of a fistful of business cards, as I like to say it. We called everyone, and the only one they answered was the practitioner of structural integration. I saw him, and within 3 sessions had a dramatic change. So that was kind of like the start. And lying on the table, I remember in the 3rd session, I was looking for something to do that I could do when I intended to move over to Japan to study more deeply the martial art that I was in. And I thought, this is something I could do over there, even if I don't speak Japanese. So I quit my job and went out and learned it, and kind of the rest is history. I mean, it's such a profound change from what I was doing before, which was really just trying to get through school and have a job and kind of, support myself. And it turned into something that was much more of a passion. And, nutrition kind of came out of that, because people would come into my office and they would sit down and we'd have a discussion, how can I help you out? And, 5 times out of 10, the first words out of their mouth were like, I'm overweight, or I'm having this or that problem. And as the discussion started to get deeper, it turned out there were more and more problems that people were having that weren't just structural. And so I started to look, over time, I started to look at the connection between the structural and the nutritive and the activities as I started to see more and more athletes. So that's a bit in a nutshell.
That's awesome too, Manny. And it's uncanny the amount of times that you see experts in the field of natural health, whether these experts be in structural integration as you are, or functional medicine, or even emotional work, whatever it is, that we often find that we have our own personal challenges. We learn to overcome those challenges, and then we become the expert in what it takes to overcome that. And you're the model of that, Manny, and it's so appreciative. So,
well, thanks. Yeah, it's one thing that I just want to add here, and this is for what it's worth. When you're doing something that is, I don't want to make more of it than it is, but honestly, when I'm working with people, I'm really working with them on a deep level. And if I'm not, we usually don't work together for long, because unless I'm really getting to the really core of what is challenging a person, what they're facing, and helping them really, ultimately, and this sounds profound, and it really is, though, change their lives.
Right.
We usually don't work together long, but when we are working on that level, they will have amazing success. So I just want to throw that in there. And when I was learning this process, one of my teachers told me, I remember she told me, it was a woman from Alaska, actually, lives on a homestead, very interesting woman. She said, fall in love with your scoliosis. And I thought, at the time I was like, no, I want to get rid of it. That's ridiculous. I was a little bit, I guess, afraid to really hear what she had to say. But what she meant was to delve into it on a deeply personal level so that you can help others. And that's exactly what happened. So.
Yeah, and that's a great point to make. I'm glad you brought that up in the interview. And I guess the place where I'll add to that is that, then the person you're working with is not only, Manny, that you put yourself in a place to be open to work on that deep level, but obviously then it's up to the client to be open to that also. So, congratulations on that.
Thanks.
All right, so let's go a little bit further. Now, you've always been focused, as we can hear through your story, for some time you've been focused on structure and efficiency of movement. But what is the basis for pretty much a sports-specific biomechanics, and why the focus on this particular topic?
Right. Well, that's a great question. The last few years, I've kind of started to delve into more into the endurance sports field and myself, as an athlete, and so I've, being in the field that I'm in, I naturally started looking at form. So, for example, I'm into triathlon, so running, swimming, biking. You look at those three things, and swimming is absolutely all about form. It's all about form, and it's so. Running is the same thing. Running and now running is there's a little more. If I were to kind of generally classify them, and folks who are listening, you may have. I'm sure you're going to have your own opinion on this, but in general, if I were to classify them, swimming is the least effortful, although it can be very effortful. It's the least effortful. It should be the least effortful. It should be the most graceful, and yet most of us struggle in the water. Even if we have coaches, even if we have swim coaches who are training us in technique, which most aren't. They're training us in workouts, but not technique, so we struggle. We just push through. And this is something that we're really good at, is pushing through, endurance athletes specifically, because the kind of mindset element is so crucial and critical, and actually draws this particular type of person, I believe, to these sports. People who like to overcome adversity are drawn to these. So rather than thinking, I need to get more graceful, I need to use less energy, people think I need to go harder, I just need to go longer, and I'm just going to grit it out. And that's a very good way. And when a person's racing, absolutely. If you're actually racing, now if you're just completing a course for time, that's one thing. But if you're racing, you absolutely have to have that mindset. So I don't want to take away from that at all. And yet, that can get in the way of us moving more efficiently. So swimming would be the most graceful. Biking would be probably the least technique-oriented, although the pure bikers might argue with me on this. And then running being the most probably difficult of the three, because it's you're right on the edge the whole time of collapsing your form if you're running at the right pace. So that said, and so then you're really pushing that mental aspect. So running really combines that. So that said, that's all fine and well, and great. Go out and train your technique and get good technique coaches and all that. But that's not what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. That's the lead into what I'm talking about, because what I'm talking about is when you go out to learn the technique, are you able to actually do the technique or not? Is your body capable and flexible enough in the right way to be able to move the way you're being taught to move? Because if it's not, you won't ever get there. That is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about sport-specific biomechanics. The biomechanics specific to that sport and a person's ability to either be able to physically do that or not, and what's it going to take to get there. Now, some of what you can do is train just the technique, and slowly you will get there, but if you want to get there faster and you want to actually get there farther, then you want to look at what are the limitations biomechanically in your own body that are keeping you from doing that specific technique a specific way. And that's really what sports-specific biomechanics is in my book.
Yeah, and that in itself is an amazing topic. And Manny, I'm sure there's people that are on the summit that maybe they're not really as much an endurance athlete, but they're athletes and they're looking to improve. So would you say that this goes across the board also for somebody who is in a non-endurance sport, such as like maybe tennis or golf or, really any sport that somebody would play. I mean, it sounds like this would be a key across the board.
Absolutely. It goes right across the board. I mean, my personal focus is endurance sports, but I have plenty of golfers as clients and, plenty of, people who do other sports. So court sports are another one. In terms of flexibility, court sports they have, where they say the ball and stick, and court sports are a little more, they require a little more explosiveness than, say, endurance sports in particular. I'm focused on endurance sports also because when you're operating over the course of, say, 5 or 10 or even 15 hours or whatever, and even a small improvement in efficiency over that time equals a huge energy savings. And so that's kind of my focus. But there are every sport has its sport-specific biomechanics associated with it. So there are specific movements, specific flexibilities that are specific to each sport. And then, you have to, ideally, what I generally do is I look at who are the very top, say 5, 10 people in the sport who are consistently at the top. It might be more than that in some sports, but the people who are consistently in the top 10, say, in a particular sport. And you analyze their movement, and then you say, like, okay, well, who's consistently on top? And let's look at the differences between those, because in endurance sports in particular, all of those people are generally as fit as each other. And sometimes often the person that wins is not the most fit. So it's not fitness. So I guess what I'm saying is you can't always out-fitness the biomechanic inefficiencies. But you start to look at the people who are right at the top and say, what is it about their movement that's different than everyone else?
Right.
And so then, okay, well, now let's look at the average athlete that comes in. Based on that, what are their flexibilities like? What are their ranges of motion like? Are they even close? What are the prime things that are getting in the way there? So, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's awesome. And it's what's interesting to me in listening to this, Manny, is that it really should be common sense, but it's not. But when you present it this way, it is common sense. So, well, and then you also, I noticed when in the first question we had where we got into, how you progress personally, and it leads me into the next subject because you brought this up before. So when you're talking about athletes and sport-specific movement training and therapies, you brought nutrition, specifically mentioning micronutrition, into the conversation. So how does that all fit together?
Yeah, that's a great question. And micronutrition is kind of like, wow, what's that? Micronutrition, how's that? And honestly, we're so focused, I think especially endurance athletes are so focused on, carb to fat to, protein ratios, which is great. And these are your macronutrients. But when you're talking about, and again, this is not to take away from any of their sports, but I'm focusing on the more kind of extreme endurance sports because people are really using their resources, at it deeply. They're going to the well, deeply, going way into the well there. And one of the challenges, and this from your practice, Glenn, but one of the challenges that people face is exhaustion. Over time they just start to deplete their body's resources. So one of the keys is, when you're stressing your body at a high level, like ongoing, is looking at the basic macronutrients is not enough. It's just not enough. You've really got to start to look at what are the micronutrients, and even in what I call micronutrition, even within micronutrition, you're going to start to, it's not just a stock thing, eat so much of this, eat so much of that. It's not that. what you have to start looking at is your body's, your individual body's response. You know, again, this is like sports-specific biomechanics. Where are you specifically challenged? Is it in recovery? Are you having a hard time recovering so you're not able to get your full workouts in? Are you lagging late in the race? You know, is that, and at some point you can't, you know, if you're trying to out-train that and it's still not working, you got to start looking at nutrition, and that's often a huge element, whether it's race day nutrition, and I would say it's not just race day nutrition, you know, pre-race, race, post-race, the nutrition that you keep over the course of your training, whether it's highly organized training where you're you know, you're periodizing and all that, or whether it's, you know, with a coach, or whether it's you know, just a lot of people train just kind of general training and race off of that. But either way, when you're doing this for a long period of time, you want to start looking at how can I keep getting these improvements? How can I sustain this over, you know, 8, 10, 15, 20 years, and be able to improve and do this? You've got to start looking very specifically at different segments of your nutrition. So I'll just throw one out there. Post workout, or post, say, high intensity workout, or post race nutrition. You know, what do you eat right after the race? A lot of people drink chocolate milk, and you know that has a great ad campaign behind it. Supposedly, there's science showing how it's the most wonderful thing since sliced bread, and you know, at a certain level, I suppose it works. But these top athletes who are promoting this, they're not just drinking chocolate milk. Hello, they're out there doing other stuff. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to keep competing at the top level. So, what's in the back pocket of these guys is they have very specific recovery regimens. Whether it's there's going to be foods that they eat, and there's going to be supplements that they take. So this is something. But it's very specific to the person. So, you know, when somebody comes in my office, I have an assessment that I give them. It kind of personalizes it. I have various levels of assessment, and we start where they're ready to start. And you don't just say, like, okay, here's what you need, and give them a pile of pills and then, you know, and a diet guideline and send them off. This is the process that you work through. It's a process, because training and improving and racing is a process. It's not something you train and suddenly you're like at the top of your game and then, you know, for the rest of your life you're good. It's just the same as that. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and I love how you put it, you know, from the perspective of, most people are getting in their fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. But, you know, when you're talking about somebody who's really pushing the body, you know, to the level they are when they're in endurance, you know, if you're not taking care of those micronutrients, because I see it with my clients, you know, if they're not getting in the, you know, if they're deficient in different minerals or even vitamins, or if they're missing that, you know, they're missing a lot. You know, so I'm so happy that you bring that up, because it's if you miss that tie, you're really missing everything. So now, also, if we can go on from there, so what are some practical ways that athletes can improve their biomechanic efficiencies in their specific sports?
Yeah, well, this is again a great question, and one of the I'll kind of answer in a couple of ways here, and one's going to be specific, one's going to be general. But the general one is. Well, one, I have some very, very good resources. You can always consult me about who to go to for coaching and specific movement and such. But one of the things that I found to be extremely useful is actually going onto YouTube and pulling up videos from, you know, experts in the field. Now, these aren't going to be as specific as I would get in my clinic, and I have various assessment methods. So one thing that people can do is they can contact me for an assessment. We'll have a link up for that where I can, you know, and I'm going to focus right now on two endurance sports right now, and that would be swimming and running. So for right now, I have an assessment set up for that. that I can send out, and people can do somewhat of a self-assessment on that. And that'll help you get an idea for, are you even able to start to get into these finer realms of movement. But YouTube is a fabulous resource for all kinds of things. Obviously, you can look at people who don't know what they're doing, and you can look at people who do know what they're doing, and you'll have to use your judgment as to who knows what they're doing and who doesn't. But there's some really good resources on there, particularly for swimming. I'll throw a few names out there. Surge Method, Stephanie Halvika, and also there's another one, Swim Smooth's another great. They have a great animation, swimsmooth.com. They have some great animations and a regular series where they talk about technique and different things like that. Now, that's at the kind of base coaching level. That's not at the very highly specific level. The assessments that I have will give you an idea of, are you even able to get into doing the things that they're recommending? Okay, so that's where I would start. Now, more specifically, and this is actually specific, and it's a general application. One of the biggest issues in all sports, but particularly in endurance sports, is being able to get a full and efficient breath of air into the body. And it sounds so simple. I can breathe. Yeah, I get lots of breaths. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Since you're breathing about 17,000 times a day, and if you're working out heavily, you're breathing more times than that a day. Consider that when you breathe 17,000 times a day, if you were to improve your vital capacity, which is the size of your breath, and or the energy that it takes, if you were to slightly improve the efficiency of each breath, say 1%, even 1%, which is a small number. We're looking at a larger number than that, but 1%. What kind of overall energy savings are you going to have? One. And two, how much more oxygen are you going to get into your system? And for those of you who are not completely in the know, oxygen is the driver of muscular power. I mean, you got to get the oxygen into the system so it can get into your mitochondria, so you can, and there's a tortuous pathway. It doesn't just go right into your system. It has to. There's a whole bunch of different factors, and this is where the micronutrition comes in as well. Getting the oxygen to the mitochondria, generating the energy, taking the, dealing with the oxidative stress caused by the mitochondrial action, and then the kind of nutritive part of getting the muscles to actually work and respond. So what kind of improvement are you going to get from that? And I have a very specific assessment that each person can do on their own, and I highly recommend that you do this to see if you're able to get an adequate baseline breath into your body. Now, my more active athletes generally tend to be more pliable in their tissues, and they tend to get better breaths, but they're still not, like the 99% of them aren't where they could be, and they aren't even close. So this is another assessment. This is part of my sports-specific biomechanics assessment, and I highly recommend that people on the call go to this after the call. I'll give you a link. And do this specific breath assessment. So you can see, am I able to get a full breath? One. And then that's going to give you an idea of what your efficiency is like. So,
well, that's, and it was so interesting even to hear the nutritive aspect of, the mitochondria taking in the oxygen. And you mentioned, that there's some micronutrients necessary there. So, I guess that forms another question for me, is how does an athlete tell what forms of nutrition are missing or are inadequate, such that they may be limiting their performance in the recovery?
Right, and that's really the $1 million question, isn't it? Right, because if we just took Centrum, we might get some of what we need, but we wouldn't get all of what we need, and whether or not we absorb it, that's a whole other issue. And so how do you assess what a person needs? And there are a million methods. Glenn, you've got your methods. I've got my methods. Every nutritionist has a different method of assessing. Now, I will, the way that I generally work is in a layered process. So I always look at what does a person need kind of globally, like where are the challenges, and then what do they need right now that's going to take them to the next level, so that once they get that nutrient into their body and they're processing it efficiently, then what layers are going to pop up so we can deal with them next. Because there's different ways, and you talk to 5 different nutritionists, and you're going to have a great discussion on what's more relevant or whatever. And so there's you've probably seen this out there. Many of you have seen advertisements for blood testing. Go get blood tested, see what nutrients are in your body, and then based on some number, some random number, like who knows who came up and where the data was got from, we'll tell you what the optimal level of nutrients are in your body. And then we're going to send you a bunch of pills based on what you need, based on the test. And I think, that could probably help on some level. I would say that's a very gross way of going about it. It's a very, what would you call it? It's not a elegant way. It's probably overusing your resources. One, you're going to take a blood test, which is a snapshot of where you're at, and then it's going to cost you a fair amount of money to do the assessment, probably in the hundreds of dollars. And then you're going to get a pile of pills based on that. You're going to take the pills and hope that you absorb them. And then, everything's good? No, it's not. You're going to have to retest again to see what is your absorption rate. Like, do you still need what you're taking? Are you taking, what is there a new thing that you need? So you got several $100s more. So how often do you do these tests? And how responsive is that process? And so again, you get 5 different nutritionists from different areas, different types of nutrition in the room, and they're all going to argue over this. But the point being that this is the way that I work, and this is the logic that I use, and this seems to work best for my clients and the rest of my system in the way I help people out. So, what we can do, I do a fairly global assessment. What are your body systems doing right now? And then based on that, we get into the more specific assessments. And that'll tell you what you need right now. We go ahead and obviously, if you're in agreement, we move forward in that direction. And then we retest. And we can retest because of the method that I use. If you're, whether you're local or whether you're far away, we can retest on a weekly basis, and it's cost effective. You get a fast, fairly accurate result, and then it allows you to evolve through the process, as opposed to kind of taking the caveman route, which is take a bunch of stuff, hope for the changes, and retest again later. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah, and it's. And I think that, you brought up earlier, you had mentioned that, I have a certain way of assessing and you have a certain way, and there's so many different valuable points of this. Like for me, when I'm assessing, I'm assessing more of the macronutrients. I'm just helping people balance their, what is on that level. But it sounds to me, and what I've, known through my years of practice also, that it's not, if you're going to be that level of an athlete, it's not, you have to get that specific. You have to go that deep. Otherwise, you're likely going to be missing the boat on some level. So thank you for sharing that. Well, now you talk about supplementation. But these days it seems that, many athletes and people in general are wary of supplements because of the fear that they may contain, and really for the athletes, banned substances, and I've run across this in my practice too. So, and basically the things that can get them labeled as dopers, so to speak. So what's your take on that as far as supplementation is concerned?
Yeah, and I mean, as far as athletes go, if they're competitive, that's a huge deal, especially in the wake of all the cycling doping scandals and Lance Armstrong and all that. It's become very polarized. There are the people who care about it really, really care about it, and then there are people who are. It's not that they don't care about it, but they're a little less. I don't want to say worried, but they're not as concerned. They can kind of look more globally. But what I have to say is this: the World Anti-Doping Agency, for those who've heard of it, they regulate basically all Olympic Olympic sports. So that's pretty much all the competitive sports. There are a few that aren't under WADA, but most of the competitive sports are under their jurisdiction. So this is global for most sports. If you're a competitive athlete, now if you're not a competitive athlete and you don't care, well, then just fast forward a couple of minutes because this will probably be boring for you. But for the competitive athletes who are concerned about this and being tested and having issues come up, I think the real challenge you have to look at, first of all, the broad definition of doping, and I'm not an expert on this, but the broad definition of doping is taking something for a performance improvement, whether it's a substance or there's various. It's a very broad definition, which can include. It's so broad it can include regular training. So and then there's a list of banned substances, which constantly changes. So honestly, you can't really know that, in this day and age, what you're eating is not going to show up in that list of banned substances simply because, now unless you're growing all of your own food and you eat no industrialized meat or anything like that, even wild-caught ocean fish can have a banned substance in it because it might have been out in the ocean and been absorbed by the fish. You really have no absolute way of knowing. And if you're on various medications, that's a whole other issue. I'll talk for now about people who aren't on medications because I don't do medications, so I have no control over what somebody's taking medically. So I'm not going to even consider those. That's between you and your doctor. But when you're talking about eating regular food, the way I look at it, you want to eat whole natural foods, so naturally produced foods. So if you're eating meat, if it's beef, grass-fed beef, pork, it's almost impossible to guarantee that it's not going to have some kind of steroid in it unless you're eating, some kind of certified, locally grown pork. Pork's such a crapshoot. I enjoy bacon like the next guy, and even in looking at buying pastured pork, you've got to ask what's in the feed. Are they feeding any GMO feeds? Are they feeding? What is the feeds? Are they eating off the land? Or are they actually giving them feeds? Most of the time they're giving them feeds. You've got to know what's in it, ideally they've got a very good supply chain so they can prove to you what's in it, or you could just avoid it. Fish, same thing. Is it a farm fish? Are they putting growth promoters in there? Because it's a farm fish, or is it a naturally caught fish? Generally, I would eat wild caught fish. So even the most basic of foods, if you're a vegan, what's in your vegetables? Let's hope they're organic and it's certified organic and it's, true to form. That might be the only way, although I personally don't subscribe. I think there's some long-term issues with veganism, but we'll let. I'm not about to get into that argument because if a person's vegan and they're completely convinced for whatever reason, then that's what they're going to do. So I will help them with where they're at. Now, when I talk about supplementation, so there's food, right? And you can't be sure of what's in your food. You eat any processed food, there's all kinds of stuff in there. You have no idea where it's from. Natural flavoring, for example. Chemicals made up in, where is it, New Jersey, in the factory in New Jersey. They call it natural flavoring. It's actually not. MSG can be a natural flavoring. Not a banned substance to my knowledge, but again, it's not labeled. So how do you know what's really in your food? You don't. So now that we've settled food, which is a crapshoot, let's go to supplements. Generally, in supplements, you've got different kinds of supplements. You've got chemically derived supplements, and you've got naturally derived supplements. So in general, and not always, but in general, the supplements that I tend to use are food concentrates. So here you have that problem with food again, but you're concentrating it. So food concentrates from organically farmed, produce and animal, probably industrially farmed animals. And then there's herbal. So where are the herbs coming from? Those are grown. There's a lot of there are a lot of herbs that are on the ban list, and you've kind of got to know what those are and what they're not. So the nutrition and the nutritional philosophy that I follow is to bring a person back to balance, to give them what their body needs, not to look at their body and say, how can we get you performing above where you're at now? Because ultimately that's why a person's in my office, but that's not where I start from. I start from what is deficient or not working well, or what are you not absorbing? What is your body lacking right now that it needs that will help it do what it does best? And that's really where we're coming from. So when you look at it from that perspective, that changes the whole perspective from buying some random GNC supplement that's, I don't know what they have these crazy names, I can't even think of them, but it's like, some, speed metal, strength stuff, it's like, I don't go there. I have no idea what these names are, but people take all kinds of crazy name stuff, right? If it's got a crazy name, it's probably not good. Don't eat it.
Rule of thumb, right?
Right, eat real food.
Yeah. Well, it's good marketing, I guess, on their end, right?
Sure, yeah, it sells because a lot of people aren't concerned. They just want to get bigger, faster, stronger. But when you get into that, area where you might get tested if you're in the top 10 or whatever, or even if not, you might get a random test, and then that could lead to an issue. So you want to be careful what you're eating.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that too, Manny, because you've gone through so many different aspects of the biomechanics, the structure, the nutrition, the micronutrition, even how this plays into, athletes and where they're concerned about supplements because of being labeled as dopers. Like, there's so much information in here. So I guess the last question, and maybe the most important, how do people get in touch with you, or to basically how do folks get a personalized assessment and a plan, to move forward to really be, the best they can be from that structural biomechanic aspect with nutrition?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have a URL that I'm going to tell everybody, and what you can do is go to this website, which is on my website. And that is, the URL is, and we'll post a link below for everyone, but the URL is the Rolf Workshop, THEROLF as in Frank, workshop.com /SSB, Sports Specific Biomechanics, SSB Assessment, ASSESSMENT. We'll put the link down below, so in case I spelled it wrong, okay. Which I've been known to do. And what you can do is go to that site, and I will have two different assessments on there. Actually, there'll be a series of them. So there's a biomechanics assessments, and then there's the nutritional assessment. Okay, so the biomechanics assessment is kind of a self-assessment. And there's an option there. If you want me to look at that assessment, then I'm happy to do that and give you my feedback, and there'll be a way to do that. But what you can do on your own is go there, and you'll have there's going to be a breathing efficiency assessment. And that's the very first one I would do before the nutritional assessment. The second thing there's going to be is a nutritional assessment. And then the third and fourth thing there's going to be is I will have two assessments, one specifically for swimming, sport-specific flexibility, and to be able to even get into the form that you're trying to do, and then the second one for running. Okay, and that's what I have put together right now. So if you're a cyclist, or if you're a volleyball player or something else, and those swimming and running assessments don't work for you, you can still do the breath assessment. That will be absolutely relevant, and you can still do the nutritional assessment. Now, with a nutritional assessment, you're going to print that up, you're going to fill it out, and then you're going to email it back to me. That one I will do as a complimentary service. So I will do the assessment if you email it back to me and give me clear, contact information, so I can follow up on this, because I'll have to. If there's no contact information, I'm not going to follow up. because I'll get too many of these. So for people who print that up, actually fill it out, and there'll be instructions there, and send it back to me. I'll do a complimentary nutritional assessment, and then I will contact you afterwards, and we can take it from there. So go ahead and you can go to therolfworkshop.com/SSB assessment. All righty?
Okay, excellent. And any last words on anything today, Manny? That's all the questions I had for you. Is there anything else you wanted to share?
No, I really appreciate you doing this for me today, Glenn, and it's always easy to have a conversation with you, and and I hope that hopefully folks got something out of today's talk. It's really I put this summit together to really help all levels of athletes within the endurance sports, or actually in any sport. So thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And I can even say, just in doing the interview, I mean, I got multiple golden nuggets myself out of this, and I look forward to moving forward into those and really speaking to you further about this, because I believe that there's areas that can help, not only everybody on the call, but I know areas you're going to help me out right away with. So, so thank you, Manny, for the opportunity to interview you and to be a part of the Endurance Summit. And thank you, everybody, for listening in on this next segment of the 2014 Endurance Summit. I am Glen Depke, signing out, and thank you so much.